Freedom in the cage. The handgun had gone silent. Elena was falling through white fog toward the churning ocean, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt nothing but the wind against her face. That's when she understood. Julian Vane couldn't follow her where she was going. 13 hours earlier. Elena knelt on the beige plush carpet of her living room, her hands trembling as she folded a silk emerald blouse. The navy blue suitcase gaped open before her like a mouth she was feeding with the scraps of her life. She worked quickly, quietly, listening to the clock on the wall tick sharp and accusatory. The shadows had grown long across the room. It was already evening, and Julian would be home soon. Her fingers brushed something cold when she reached into the bottom of the bookshelf to grab her journals. Behind a copy of The Great Gatsby, she found it. A small black cube with a tiny glass lens no larger than a pinhead. A hidden camera. Red LED light blinked once. Then again. Rhythmic. Alive. She pulled it out slowly, as if sudden movement might wake it. "He's been watching," she whispered, the words barely forming. Her skin crawled as she realized the light had been blinking for months. Years, perhaps. Every moment in this apartment, every conversation, every private thought spoken aloud, had been captured, archived, documented. The camera hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack when she dropped it. She looked up at the smoke detector in the ceiling, then at the air vent. Then she understood that this single black cube was not an aberration. It was evidence of a pattern. How many others were there? How long had this been happening? The distant sound of tires crunching in the driveway made her heart stutter. She grabbed her phone from the coffee table. 12 missed calls from Julian, all from the last 2 hours. She could see his name there on the screen, blinking like another red LED light. 12 times he had tried to reach her, too. Elena moved to the suitcase with new urgency. She stopped folding and started throwing. Clothes landed haphazardly, a sweater inside out, pants twisted with sleeves, her underwear tumbling over shoes. It didn't matter anymore if things were neat. Neatness was a luxury she had lost the moment she pulled that camera from behind Gatsby's faded spine. The front door swung open hard enough to hit the stopper. Julian filled the doorway in his charcoal suit, tie loosened, looking like he'd stepped out of an advertisement for expensive things. He held a single red rose in his left hand. His eyes were cold. "Going somewhere, Elena?" His voice was low, the kind of low that precedes violence. Elena tried to push past him with the suitcase. His hand closed around her upper arm, and his thumb dug in through the emerald silk. Pain shot through her bicep as the fabric strained between them. She could see the skin beneath turning colors. It shouldn't turn. "Let me go," she said. Julian jerked the suitcase from her other hand and flung it back into the living room. It burst open like a ripe fruit, spilling clothes everywhere. The emerald blouse falling near the hidden camera on the floor. He shoved her against the hallway wall hard enough that photographs rattled from the impact. She felt the sharp edge of a frame corner dig into her shoulder blade. Elena kicked him in the shin. Her heel connected with the front of his tibia, and she felt him flinch. She ducked under his arm and ran toward the kitchen, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, she heard him curse and the sound of his footsteps, heavier, faster, closing the distance. She reached the kitchen counter and grabbed a brass paperweight that had always sat there gathering dust. It was heavier than she expected. Good. Julian entered the kitchen and stopped, blocking the exit. He was breathing hard now, and his eyes had gone flat. The charming businessman had disappeared. What remained was something else. Elena held the paperweight up. It caught the light, brass gleaming like a small sun between them. She was holding her life in her hand, and she knew it. "Don't be stupid," Julian said. His voice had changed. It was smoother now. Reasoning voice. The voice he used before he hurt her. "Put that down, and we can talk about this." Instead, Elena slammed the swinging kitchen door. It swung both ways. That had always been the design flaw of this kitchen. She slid a heavy wooden chair under the handle from the inside. Julian thumped against the other side. The impacts were rhythmic, testing. Dust fell from the door frame with each hit. Elena scanned the room. Her car keys. Where were her car keys? She opened the junk drawer and found them immediately, hanging from a red keychain shaped like a heart. A gift from Julian 3 years ago. She could see the date on the transfer. 2 days before he told her the lie. Elena heard the chair under the handle shift. 3 more impacts, and the door would give. She stuffed the ledger into the back of her waistband, grabbed her car keys, and looked at the window above the sink. The frame was old, but well maintained. Julian liked things to work properly. "Elena, don't make this harder." His voice was muffled but loud. She could hear the strain in it now. He was using both hands on whatever battering ram he'd found. She unlocked the window and lifted it open. The backyard beyond was dark, lit only by the flickering lights of the neighbor's house. She could hear the rain starting, that thin hissing sound of water beginning to fall. Elena climbed up onto the sink. The ledger pressed against her skin. The car keys bit into her palm. She pulled herself up and through the window frame, her torso bending awkwardly as she tried to fit through the opening. For a moment, she was stuck, hips at the sill, upper body hanging outside. And she imagined Julian running into the kitchen at this exact moment and simply pushing her the rest of the way through. But he didn't. She tumbled forward and fell. The grass below was soft but cold. Mud splattered across her emerald blouse as she landed hard, the breath knocked out of her. She lay there for 2 seconds, maybe 3, gasping. Rain was coming down harder now. She could feel it cold on her face. The kitchen door burst open behind her. Julian's silhouette appeared in the window frame. She didn't wait to see more. Elena pushed herself to her feet and ran toward the back gate. The mud grabbed at her shoes, making every step feel like moving through water. Behind her, she heard Julian's grunt as he climbed out the window. He was right behind her. She could feel him getting closer. The back gate was there, the wrought iron one that led to the alley, but it was locked. A heavy padlock hung from the latch, newly installed. She hadn't seen Julian put it there. Or perhaps she had, and he had simply told her it was for security. And she had believed him because she believed everything he told her. Julian was close enough now that she could hear his breathing. His hands reached for her neck. Elena spun around. She swung her purse with everything she had. The leather bag connected with his temple, and the corner hit something solid. Bone. He staggered, cursing, his hands dropping away from her neck. Elena climbed the wooden fence panels on the side of the property. Splinters dug into her palms, but she didn't feel them. She pulled herself up and over, falling into the neighbor's driveway with a hard impact. Gravel scraped her hands, her shoes filled with small stones. Julian was over the fence a second later. She heard him hit the gravel behind her, heard him catch her ankle as she was turning toward the street. His grip was tight, his fingers digging into the soft skin above her shoe. He pulled. She kicked back with her other heel, connecting with his chest. The grip loosened. Elena ran. She didn't think about where she was going. She just ran. Her car was 6 blocks away, parked on a side street where she always left it because Julian hated how it looked in the driveway. Her shoes slapped the wet pavement. The rain was coming down in earnest now, obscuring the streetlights. She could see his lights in her peripheral vision, the black SUV turning corners behind her. He was in the vehicle now. Of course he was. He'd never been the type to chase someone on foot for long. Elena cut between two houses, jumped a fence, and ran through someone's backyard. A dog started barking somewhere behind her. The SUV couldn't follow through yards. That was the advantage of feet over wheels. She burst onto the side street where her car was parked. The silver sedan looked small and helpless under the streetlight. She fumbled with her keys, got the door open, and threw herself inside. The engine started immediately. She'd always kept it in good condition, always made sure the battery was charged. Reverse, hard acceleration. The tires spun for a moment before catching pavement. She was backing away from the street corner when the black SUV appeared, sliding into a sharp turn. Julian wasn't even out of the vehicle when she put the car in forward and stepped on the accelerator. The motel was outside the city limits, cheap and anonymous. The kind of place where nobody asked questions. Elena paid cash for a room on the upper floor and locked herself inside with a "Do Not Disturb" sign. She wrapped herself in a thin white towel and turned the space heater up as high as it would go. Her wet clothes lay draped over every available surface. The emerald blouse across the back of a chair, steaming slightly. Through the window, the neon sign buzzed and flickered, casting alternating colors across the room. When her hands had stopped shaking enough to turn the pages, Elena opened the ledger again. Her fingers were still wet. They left marks on the paper that began to fade almost immediately. In the back flap, she found a photograph folded into thirds. She opened it slowly, as if it might detonate. Julian sat at a bar, laughing. His arm was around someone, a man with familiar features, sharp eyes behind expensive glasses, dark hair swept back from a high forehead. A man she'd been paying $150 per hour to listen to her problems. Her therapist. "Marcus," she said aloud. The word felt like poison in her mouth. "You were telling him everything. Every session for 2 years. Every vulnerability, every doubt, every moment of weakness had been carefully extracted and delivered back to Julian like a report. When she'd mentioned to Marcus that she was thinking of leaving, Julian had shown up that very evening with flowers and an apology and the careful reconstruction of her confidence. When she told Marcus about the small inheritance from her mother, Julian had suddenly had a plan for it, an investment opportunity that never quite panned out. A notification pinged on her phone, an encrypted message from an unknown number. "I know where you are, Elena. Come back before things get messy." The LED light on the motel room's smoke detector caught her attention. She stared at it for a long moment, then looked at the air vent above the bathroom. How many of them were there? She heard the car door close in the parking lot. Heavy footsteps on the metal walkway outside her room. She moved to the door and looked through the peephole. 2 men were walking past. They weren't stopping at her room, but she knew what she had to do. Elena grabbed a jacket, climbed out the back window, and kept running. The subway station was crowded with early morning commuters. Elena had stolen a gray hoodie from a gym locker 2 hours ago. She wore it now with the drawstrings pulled tight, her head down. She moved through the crowd like a stone moving through water, present but invisible. A hand grabbed her shoulder. "Elena, you're having a manic episode." The voice was familiar, soothing, professional. "Let me help you." Marcus stood there with a medical bag in his hand, and that concerned expression she'd seen in his office 100 times. It was all performance. Every word, every gesture, every moment of perceived empathy. All of it was a mechanism designed to extract information. She could see it now. The performance was visible like scaffolding on a building under renovation. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not fine." He was reaching into his medical bag. "You need medical attention. You've been under stress, and now you're in a state of—" Elena screamed. The sound cut through the station noise, sharp and terrifying. Heads turned. Marcus lunged, his hand coming up with a syringe. The needle was already uncapped. He pressed it toward her neck. She bit his hand. His palm, specifically, the soft part between thumb and forefinger. He yelled and jerked his hand back, blood welling up where her teeth had broken skin. She grabbed his medical bag and swung it at his body. It connected with his stomach, and the air left him in a sound somewhere between a grunt and a gasp. An incoming train's wind hit them both, her hair whipping across her face. Marcus pinned her against the yellow safety line at the platform edge. The train was coming fast, headlights cutting through the morning haze. Elena smashed her forehead into his nose. She felt the cartilage give way beneath her skull, felt the immediate welling of blood. His grip loosened. She slammed the medical bag into his stomach again and spun away from him. The doors of the train were closing. She dove through them. For 3 seconds, she could see Marcus recovering, wiping blood from his shirt as the train pulled away from the station. Then the platform was gone, and there was only the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of wheels on track and the cold, stale air of the subway tunnel. She rode that train for an hour, watching the same faces in the same positions, waiting for someone to recognize her, waiting for police, waiting for anything. Nothing happened. She was just another person in gray clothes, heading somewhere at an early hour. When she got off, the city had started to wake up. People were buying coffee from mobile stands. Cars were backed up on the streets. Normal life was proceeding as if Elena wasn't being hunted through its center. She drove for hours on a coastal road that curved upward toward the cliffs. The highway narrowed. Traffic thinned. By the time she realized the SUV was pushing her toward the guardrail, it was too late to do anything but accept it. The collision came from the side. A hard impact that sent her car spinning toward the railing. Metal shrieked against metal. The guardrail caught her front bumper and held, but just barely. She came to rest with the front half of her vehicle hanging over empty air and the sound of waves crashing 100 feet below. Elena climbed out of the driver's side. Her forehead was bleeding where it had hit the steering wheel. The fog was so thick that she couldn't see more than 30 feet in any direction. The world had been reduced to gray, and the sound of water hitting rocks. Julian's SUV stopped 10 feet behind her. He emerged slowly, and he was holding a silver handgun. He looked calm, almost bored. Like someone who had already won a game she was still playing. "It's over, Elena," he said, his voice cutting through the fog. "Give me the ledger, and maybe I'll let the police take you quietly." Elena backed away from him. One step, another. Her heels were getting closer to the cliff edge. She could feel the earth ending. "I know what you've done," she said. "The foundation, the money, all of it." Julian smiled. It was the smile of a man who believed he had already calculated all possible outcomes and found them favorable. "The ledger doesn't matter. I have copies. Marcus has copies. Everyone who needs to know already knows." Elena took another step back. Her heels were hanging over the edge now. The churning white water was directly below. She looked down at the ledger in her hands. The black leather, the gold embossing, her name on the spine. "You know what I realized?" she said quietly. "What?" "That this book doesn't contain proof. It contains the evidence of a man who likes to keep records. It's documentation of paranoia, not power." Julian raised the gun. His finger moved to the trigger. "One last chance, Elena." Elena looked him in the eye. She leaned back, and the ledger fell from her hands into the fog. For a moment, she watched it descend through the white air. Then she followed it off the cliff. The fall lasted approximately 3 seconds. During that time, Elena remembered being 7 years old at a municipal pool, her father holding her hand as she stood on the diving board for the first time. He'd said, "The water is always softer than it looks from up here. Trust it." She hit the ocean in a perfect pencil dive and sank deep into the cold. The water embraced her. It held her down and held her safe. When her lungs began to burn, she pushed upward, breaking the surface in an explosion of breath and sound. Above on the cliff, she heard 2 gunshots. She couldn't see where they went. She was already swimming toward the sea cave she remembered from her childhood, the one Julian never knew existed because she had never told him about it. Her parents had taken her there when she was young, before she became Elena, who belonged to Julian, before she became anyone's property. She was a competitive swimmer. She had been 17 years old, good enough for regional championships, before she'd met Julian at a cocktail party, and he'd suggested, very gently, that swimming took up too much of her time, that it would be better if she focused on their relationship, that it would be better if she gave things up. She hadn't touched a pool in 3 years. Her muscles remembered the motion anyway. The stroke, the breath, the rhythm. She moved through the water with power. The current was strong, but she was stronger. The cave entrance was just ahead, a dark maw in the gray fog. She pulled herself onto a flat rock inside the cave and lay there shaking and gasping. Water dripped from somewhere above, creating a steady rhythm in the darkness. She could hear the tide moving outside, the surge and pull of it against the rocks. She had hidden the flash drive from Dr. Aris in a waterproof case around her neck before she jumped. Now she pulled it out and looked at it. A small piece of metal no larger than her thumb. Everything was on this drive. Everything Julian had wanted to hide. The foundation, the money, the surveillance equipment. The pharmacist Marcus had been paying to write fake prescriptions for medications that didn't exist. Elena looked at her reflection in a tide pool. The woman looking back was not someone she recognized. Her hair was matted with seawater and sand. The emerald blouse was now a collection of rags. Her makeup had run, her skin was pale. She smiled at the stranger. "You're free now," the stranger said. Or perhaps Elena said it. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. A week later, she sat at a computer in an internet cafe in a remote village. She had cut her hair short and dyed it blonde. She wore a simple denim jacket that she'd bought from a thrift store. She was no one. She was everyone. She was finally invisible. She navigated to the file she'd been preparing. It contained everything. Every photograph from the ledger, every transaction, every name associated with the foundation. Copies of Marcus's fraudulent prescription records. Audio files from her therapy sessions in which Julian could be heard coaching Marcus on extraction techniques. She positioned her hands over the keyboard. The progress bar appeared. Leak all foundation zip, 0% complete. She hit enter. The bar began to move. 10%, 25%, 50%. The upload was going to dozens of news outlets simultaneously. It was going to law enforcement agencies in 3 states. It was going to journalists who had been investigating the foundation for years. At 100%, the computer gave a soft chime. The upload was complete. Elena opened a news feed on the same computer. It took 4 minutes for the first articles to appear. 7 minutes for the arrests to begin happening. She watched footage of Julian being led out of his office building in handcuffs, his charcoal suit wrinkled now, his expensive watch glinting in the camera lights. She watched Marcus being loaded into a police van, his face turned away from the cameras, his identity as a licensed therapist being revoked in real time, as news anchors explained the concept of breach of confidentiality to their afternoon audiences. She watched the Foundation headquarters being raided by federal agents, watched boxes of documents being carried out, watched the careful structure that Julian had spent years building collapse in a matter of hours. Elena pulled a small Polaroid from her pocket. It was an old photograph of her mother holding a baby. On the back, her mother had written, "Always knew." She'd found it in the sea cave after the tide went down, miraculously preserved in the waterproof case she'd kept it in. She looked at it for a long moment, then tore it into small pieces and let them fall into the recycling bin beneath the computer desk. An email appeared in the anonymous account she'd set up. From Dr. Eris. "Elena, you should know. The $50,000 wasn't yours anyway. Julian stole it from the Foundation. He was using you as a shield from the beginning. You were never the target. You were the fall guy." Elena read it twice. She closed the email and sat back in her chair. There was no anger left in her. There was nothing left at all, except a kind of perfect clarity about the nature of her own survival. She stood up from the computer and walked out of the cafe into the late afternoon light. 3 days later, she stood on a train platform in a city she'd never visited. The station was busy with people, some arriving, some departing. Everyone was moving between destinations, between lives. Elena held a canvas backpack in one hand and a train ticket in the other. The ticket said one way, and the destination was somewhere she had never been. She looked at it and smiled. She checked the schedule. The train would leave in 4 minutes. Elena walked to the platform's edge and stood there, feeling the movement of the afternoon air, watching the clouds drift overhead. A single wildflower was growing between the track stones, a purple bloom that had somehow pushed through concrete and metal, and the weight of all the trains that had passed over this spot. She knelt down and looked at it more closely. It was fragile. It was temporary. It would probably die before the end of the week. But for now, it was alive and growing and beautiful in a way that seemed to matter. She stood up and heard the whistle of an approaching train. Elena walked toward the platform doors as they slid open. She stepped inside the train car, found a seat by the window, and sat down. The backpack she placed on the seat beside her. She was carrying almost nothing, carrying almost a change of clothes, some cash. The flash drive, that was enough. The train began to move. The platform slid away. The station disappeared. The city began to shrink, to become smaller and less real with every second that passed. Elena watched it go. The skyline that contained her old life. The streets where Julian walked as a free man for the last time. The apartment where the red lights still blinked in the darkness. She closed her eyes. The rhythm of the rails beneath the train was steady. Clack, 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 clack. It was the sound of distance. It was the sound of hours passing. It was the sound of the world moving on, carrying her with it into a destination she couldn't yet see. When Elena opened her eyes again, it was dark outside the window. The landscape had changed completely. Forests replaced city streets, mountains replaced office buildings. Nothing looked familiar. Everything looked possible. She looked at the seat beside her. For a moment, she thought she saw the old photograph. Her mother holding a baby. Always knew, written on the back. But when she looked again, the seat was empty. Elena turned back to the window and watched the darkness move past. The train carried her forward into a life that didn't have a name yet, into a future that hadn't been written in any ledger, into a tomorrow that belonged entirely to her. The red LED light of her phone blinked once in her pocket. a notification she didn't check. She simply reached down and turned the phone off. The light died. In the window reflection, she could see her own face in the dark glass. A stranger looking back at her, small and distant, but undeniably free. The train moved on into the night, and Elena moved with it, toward everywhere and nowhere, finally released from the weight of being anyone else's.